Good evening. I'm Rich Treppies, the Senior Director of Outreach and Education for the Cleveland Council on World Affairs, and I'd like to welcome you to this evening's program. I hope that you know that the mission of the Cleveland Council on World Affairs is to increase your understanding and engagement in international and global issues. And the way that we do that is through great programs such as this evening's. We do it through our education programs. It includes Model United Nations, and we do have a group of students from St. Vincent St. Mary's in Akron who participate in our Model UN program. We also do it through using our speakers and visitors to reach out to students through some distance learning programs. And we also have an extensive international visitors program. So with all three of those programs, we try to accomplish our mission. This evening, we have a very great program, and we will have Doug Sebring introducing our speaker in just a moment. But if you are not a member of the Cleveland Council on World Affairs, we do have a sufficient supply of membership brochures that are on the table right outside. So please consider, if you're not a member, to join this great organization that's been around since 1923. In addition, we do have two other programs coming up very quickly. This Friday, we have Dr. Volkan, who will be talking about killing in the name of identity, 9/11, and other massive things. Then that will be at 6 p.m. here at the Union Club. And then next Tuesday, October the 18th, we will have the Ambassador of Hungary to the United States, Dr. Gorgi Sosberi, who will be talking about Europe and Hungary dealing with the economy, and that will be at 12 p.m. here at the Union Club. So there were flyers out there. I think the information may be on the program too. The registration for both of those events ends this Friday. So get your name in there. You can register online for the program, or you could even possibly get some information today if you wanted to. At this time, I'm going to have Doug Sebring, Dr. Doug Sebring, come up and introduce our speaker. Doug is a retared educator, just as I am, but not really retired. He's very active with the Educational Service Center of Cuyahoga County, working with the Asian Society. He and his wife Lynn are fantastic volunteers for the Council through our International Visitors Program, having served as host families for our visitors through the years. And he's a great supporter. We really appreciate him and Lynn. And at this point, Doug, introduction.
Thank you. It's a true pleasure to have had the opportunity this week to get to know Senor Reyes. We only reiterated to ourselves what a small world this is. And just prior to my introducing him, I want to give you just a little bit of background. My wife was a Fulbright exchange teacher in Veracruz, Mexico, several years ago. And we were visiting friends there this past spring. She was talking with a couple of our Mexican sons, young men who came and lived with us and went to school at North Homestead High School. As she talked to them, they were commenting about how sad they were that a friend of theirs, another young man in his early 20s, had just died. He died as a result of going to work with his father in Juarez. As it turned out, we mentioned this to Senor Reyes on Sunday at lunch, that gentleman worked for him in the city of Juarez. So we have this very close connection right there. And then two, we had information from our friends that 35 bodies showed up at the mall in Veracruz, and very, very far south in the Gulf. It's not an area where you really would think very much about the drug cartels, about the violence that's so endemic to the borders. But this is something that just brought it home to us, that the problems that we face with the drug cartels and the violence along the border, with which the mayor is so familiar, has spread throughout the country. And I think one thing that you'll find from the course of his comments this evening, this is a problem that we as Americans own, because we're contributing so much to the profits of those drug cartels. But it is indeed a pleasure to introduce José Reyes Ferriz, who was recently the mayor of Ciudad Juarez. And if you're familiar with your geography, that's the city across the border from El Paso, Texas. He has a unique insight on the war on drugs in Mexico, having dealt with the cartels in Juarez for 3 years while he was serving as mayor. During his term, the drug cartels left close to 7,000 people dead in the city, and 150 of them, city employees who were trying to fight those cartels. Under constant threats to his life and to his family's life, he continued to implement a policy in which he was trying to gain control of the safety and security of the city by changing the way the police department operated. Unfortunately, it was a corrupt system that he was trying to normalize, and he often dealt with elements within the police who were inflicting violence on the people for whom they had been hired to protect. Mr. Reyes Ferriz is one of the few attorneys who is licensed to practice law both in the United States and in Mexico. His practice covers all aspects of doing business in Mexico, everything from company and corporation, financing, international trade, tax, regulatory compliance, and mergers and acquisitions. His experience of more than 20 years as a corporate attorney has provided him with extraordinary expertise dealing with businesses there and here. He is also a professor of international contracts, commercial law, customs, and economic law at the University of Juarez, where he was the dean of the master's program in international trade. He received his law degree from Juarez University and then his master's in law from University of Notre Dame, having the unique opportunity of learning on the campus that Notre Dame operates in London. A unique gentleman. We've thoroughly enjoyed having spent a week with him here in Northern Ohio. I'd also like to mention to you that Senor Reyes is here at the Graces of Oberlin College. He's teaching a class this week for the college, and they have generously offered his time this evening to speak with us here. So I'm sure you're going to find this to be an extremely elucidating program, very approachable gentleman, and I think you're in for a real treat this evening. Thank you, and Senor Reyes Ferriz.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon to you all. It's such a pleasure to be back in Cleveland, especially a beautiful building. We were commenting on this building, how impressive it is for those of us who come from different type of city where no tall buildings like this and the majesty of structure like this represents the city very well. And I enjoyed my visits. I've had the opportunity to be here 3 times now, and I love the theater district. And of course, when they told me if I wanted to come teach for a week, I said yes. It's a wonderful city. And thank you for the invitation to speak this afternoon. The war on drugs and what's happening in Mexico is, of course, something that requires that we understand what's happening in order to solve it, but also in order to have the consequences of what's happening in Mexico not happen elsewhere. And what actually happened in Mexico was we never had a DEA in Mexico. We used to have an agency called the National Security Agency, which basically tortured people. They would take drug dealers and big criminals and take them and torture them and find out information about what they were doing. And that way the government had a lot of control over the criminal elements in the city, in the country. When change of presidents came through, with the change of president to a gentleman called Ernesto Cedillo, he decided he didn't want an agency, government agency, to be torturing people. And then by torturing, I mean what's happening in Guantanamo, same type of thing. So the president basically cut down the operations of this agency. When he did that, he didn't replace the agency with anything else. The federal agencies, the federal government, they did federal crime, but not drug interdiction itself. The Army did fights against the traffickers, mainly who were cultivating marijuana in the western states of Mexico, but not investigations of drug cartels. And the agency that did the job was basically disappearing. We later got a new president, President Vicente Fox. Vicente Fox finalized this agency that still existed in the books, but that was not getting enough funding, and he basically did away with it, never creating a DEA, an agency specifically designed to fight drugs. So during 12 years, the drug organizations began growing, and they grew very fast. At the same time, President Clinton had formalized something that was on the books already from the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Administration, called the assault weapons ban. And basically, he went to Congress because he had control of Congress, the Democrats had control of Congress, went to Congress and said, well, we're already doing this because they were already doing it. And they passed a law saying that because the Second Amendment of the United States says everybody has a right to bear arms, you try to define what type of arms could be used in the United States. And the definition up to that point was that everybody could buy guns that had to do with sports. And the definition was, it is not a sports gun if it has automatic firing power, if it has something that can be used militarily, basically. So the assault weapons ban came into force, but when President George W. Bush became president, he let it expire. That began the problem. The problem began because 50-millimeter weapons, we're talking weapons that can shoot down an airplane. We're talking weapons that can penetrate bulletproof cars and bulletproof vests. We're talking weapons that can fire 400 rounds a minute. Were now considered sports weapons and are now available to criminals and law-abiding people in the United States, and of course, easily taken to Mexico. But the Congress of the United States at the same time said, we are not going to sell 50-millimeter weapons to the Mexican army because the Mexican army doesn't need 50-millimeter weapons. They're too much. And so the Mexican police had revolvers. That's what the Mexican law said. 6 bullet revolvers. The federal, the army had machine guns that could not fire automatically. And the drug dealers had automatic weapons, AK-47s, that you can buy in the international market. They're not manufactured in the United States. You can buy them in Romania, you can buy them in Russia, you can buy them in China for $30 wholesale. These weapons came into Mexico. When these weapons came into Mexico, the drug dealers knew they could overpower the police. They knew they could overpower the government. And they started threatening the government. And they started threatening the police. And they started growing. And of course, they organized themselves in such a way that 4 major cartels operated throughout the country. They divided the country for themselves. One of the cartels operated in the Gulf, the Gulf Cartel. One of the cartels operated in the Pacific, in the area of Sinaloa, Pacific Cartel or Cartel Chaco Guzman. Another cartel operated in Tijuana, and another cartel operated in Juarez. Something else happened at that same time that we didn't recognize, and we should have. President Bush, in fact, it was President Clinton. President Clinton realized that the federal government, the US federal government, could not talk to the state governments in matters of immigration. There is this dispute about what the states can do, and the Alabama laws is a good example, and the Arizona laws is a good example. They are discussing whether states can handle immigration matters. And at that point, it was very clear that the states could not do anything that had to do with immigration. So the states would catch somebody, a killer, put him in jail, and then when he finished his sentence, go out. But they could not call the INS to ask them, is this guy legally in the country? And President Clinton realized, no, they should talk. And he allowed states to be able to talk to INS, and of course that's a good idea. And then they catch somebody, they have them run their sentence, and when they finalize their sentence, if they're illegally in the country, they get immediately deported, which is a good idea. But the way they did it is they say, where are we going to deport them to? And they said, well, if we deport them to Tijuana, you can cross that. And once most of the illegal crossings into the United States happen in San Diego, because you cross from Tijuana and you're in San Diego, and if you're in San Diego, you're in the U.S., anywhere in the U.S. There's no way to stop somebody who just crossed into San Diego because it's so big, it's so wide, so many roads, so many ways to get to LA, to other cities. So that basically means you're in Pittsburgh the next day. Same thing happens, not as fast, but same thing happens in Arizona. Right now, most of the crossings takes place in Arizona. So they decided, let's send them to El Paso and deport them to Juarez. Because El Paso is so isolated. The closest city, major city, is Albuquerque. It's 3.5-hour drive through the desert, one road. The Border Patrol can patrol that easily. So they started deporting criminals to Juarez. 80,000 criminals were deported to Juarez in 3 years, to one single city. 27,000 of them were either murderers, rapists, child molesters, or major criminals in 3 years. And we didn't find out about that. We didn't find out until a little girl, 8 years old, disappeared in Juarez, and we started looking frantically for her, found her body, then found who had killed her. Were 3 guys deported from Denver, Colorado, all 3 of them child molesters, convicted child molesters in the U.S. They were deported to Juarez. Nobody bothered to tell us they had been deported to our city. This is a major element of what is happening in the drug war. And the reason is, when the U.S. started major criminal sentencing in the United States, we all know that 60% of those in the jail systems are African American. A large portion is also Latino or Hispanic. And in the jails, there were racial fights. And the Mexicans, trying to protect themselves from the racial fights, created something they called the Mexican Mafia. The Mexican Mafia was a jail gang that was created to protect themselves. Mexican Mafia in the 70s grew, they were released. That gang created several gangs, mainly in California, on 18th Street, on 13th Street in central LA, called the Mara Salvatrucha, los 13, los 18. Those groups and the Mexican Mafia divided into the Aztecas, the Mexicles, and a very violent gang called the Artistas Asesinos, the double A's, the artist assassins. They really feel that killing is an art form. Now, John McCain says that the Aztecas, they're Mexican in heritage, but many of them are U.S. nationals. They're born in the U.S. The Aztecas, who have been in jail, have been released, control the sale of drugs in 252 cities in the United States. This is a fact. These Mexican, not drug cartels, this Mexican drug gangs control the sale of drugs in 252 U.S. states. And when a criminal gets deported, an Azteca, but not a U.S. Azteca, a Mexican Azteca gets deported, they get sent to Juarez, and what I did was, I said, well, 100,000 people get deported to Juarez, so they're good Mexicans, hardworking, they're illegals. I'll help them get to their homes, because I don't want them in my city. It's pretty hard on the infrastructure. So I had partners, and I allowed them to use my telephones to call their families in the U.S. and in Mexico, pay for the bus, gave them money to eat, and send them home. When I started doing that, suddenly we started seeing prostitutes on the bridge and identifying Aztecas by their tattoos. And if they saw an Azteca, prostitute would say, "Here, boy." And this person who had been in jail for a long time would not take advantage of going home, gets recruited into the drug cartel's operations, and then they ask him, "Who's your buddy from jail?" "Oh, this other Azteca who lives in Pittsburgh." "Oh, can you contact him so that we can send him drugs and he can sell the drugs over there?" And he says, "Yeah." And so that is what has all of a sudden, all together, created the situation we're in. Unfortunately for us, during the Bush administration would not recognize that the U.S. is part of the solution to the problem. The U.S. administration created a wall. They said, "Oh, that Mexico has a problem. They do have a problem. Let's build a big, gigantic wall on Mexico so that the problem will not cross into the United States." And they spent $15 billion, or I don't know, a tremendous amount of money to build a wall. But guess what? The problem is here. The United Nations has estimated in its World Drug Report that drug sales represent a $40 billion industry in the United States. The drug sales in the United States represent a $40 billion industry. Out of the $40 billion, only $7 billion go to the Mexican cartels and the Colombian drug producers. $33 billion remain in the United States, fortifying the groups that are selling the drugs, allowing them to buy guns, allowing them to get big organizations. That is the problem we face. Mexican President Felipe Calderón decided that the growth the cartels had during the past 12 years, 3 with the pre, 6 with the pre, 6 with the PI. So it's not something with parties or anything else. During the last 12 years, we had allowed them to grow so much that we needed to stop it. President Calderon got the army out and said, I want you to do it. He did not have a good police department. The federal police at that point had only 4,000 officers for the whole country. When they did this, the Army is the Army. It's not a police department. They don't investigate. They're not set up for that. They'll go out with guns and they'll do their job because they're good at it, but they're not a police department. And so they didn't have any police support to do what they needed to do. But they did hit the organizations. And they did stop some of the flow going into the United States of cocaine, mainly through Mexico. When President Calderon became president, 90% of the cocaine that's consumed in the United States went to Mexico. By 2009, only 60% went through Mexico, which is a big victory for President Calderon. That other 30% has retaken the old route, which was the Caribbean route, going into Florida. That used to be the preferred route for the Colombians, and Miami was a big drug dealing point for cocaine, and so much so that we had Miami Vice and Scarface, and so many movies and TV shows about what was going on. The federal government managed to control that, and so they started using Mexico. And where did they prefer to do it? Well, the city that has the best logistics position between the United States and Mexico, and that's Juarez. Juarez, El Paso have large airports, 2 highways, 2 railroads. It's the best logistics between the 2 countries. So it's the preferred route for the drug cartels. Now, the pie got smaller. They were selling through Mexico 90% of the cocaine. It went down to 60%. At the same time, many of the drug users switched from cocaine to methamphetamine. Methamphetamines are cheaper, but most of all, they're homegrown. They don't have to be imported from Colombia. They're built with whole medicines, and that already has it. So the price of cocaine went down, and the consumption of cocaine went down. So the pie became a lot smaller. And the drug cartels, when they saw that, they began a tremendous fight amongst themselves to try and get a bigger piece of a smaller pie. And that is what's happening right now in Mexico. Several cities are in the midst of a tremendous war between the cartels. Main cities, Tamaulipas, where the Zetas, the Gulf Cartel, and the Pacific Cartel are fighting. Juarez, where the Pacific Cartel and the Juarez Cartel are fighting. And the routes leading up to them, which are Torreón and Durango and Sinaloa, where the drugs come in. That is what is happening right now. What do we need to do? What can we do? What can we ask our governments to do? Well, President Calderon came to the United States and he was allowed to speak to a joint session of Congress. And he had a good message, but I think it was not appropriately presented. He said, you know, the Second Amendment is hurting Mexico. We need to do something about it. Wrong message. The Second Amendment is fine. I support the Second Amendment. I think people should have the right to bear arms and buy guns and have the guns in their homes. As generally speaking, personally, I hate guns. But I think as a society, we have to allow that. So the real message should be, let's protect the Second Amendment. But let's apply the law. Let's make the people who want to buy an assault weapon comply with the law. Let's do background searches on them. And if they buy 2 or more guns, and they buy them to send them to Mexico, let's prosecute them. When President Obama first came into office, he hired 100 new ATA agents. First thing they did was go to El Paso, Texas, search the database of people who had bought an AK-47 or an assault weapon, and then cross-reference that information to the people who had were receiving food stamps. They found a lady who bought 10 AK-47 and was receiving food stamps. They went to her home, knocked on their door, said, she opened the doors, they said ATF. She said, my husband made me do it. Immediately, she knew what they were there for. And the ATF agent say, where's your husband? He's in jail. And what happened? Well, I told my husband, I need some money. The kids, they need to eat, they're going to school. And he said, there's going to be some people visiting you. They'll pay you $100 for every AK-47 you buy. She said, well, I needed about $1,000, so I bought 10 and got $1,000. She conspired to buy guns, to be illegally taken into Mexico, should be prosecuted. We should stop, not because of her, but because of the many hundreds like her that are doing that and are sending guns into Mexico. When the war between the cartels began in Juarez, 2 cars started shooting at each other with 50-millimeter weapons right next to McDonald's. Bullets sprayed all over, houses, everywhere. One of the groups lost, people were killed. We came in and took that 50-millimeter weapon. 10 days later, a priest was stopped on the bridge with food donations from the United States going to the poor in Mexico and a 50-millimeter weapon under it, bought over the internet to substitute the one the drug cartels had lost 10 days before. We need to prosecute. We need to have the laws that are on the books, and we need to apply it. We don't need to change the Second Amendment. I don't think so. But we need to do something. And the U.S. government needs to do something. And we need to do something about those $33 billion that are in the U.S. economy and have been cleansed. And there hasn't been a single prosecution for money laundering. We need to do something. And I think the most important thing that we need to do is we need to have a coherent drug policy between the countries. We talked about my chief of jail who was killed. I also buried 2 of my chiefs of police. When we were preparing the funeral of the second one, I heard on the radio that U.S. swimmer that won so many gold medals, and I forget his name, Michael Phelps. who had been caught using drugs in video was not to be prosecuted. I really don't care what the U.S. policy is towards drugs. California has basically legalized marijuana. If you get caught with marijuana in California, you pay a $50 fine. If you throw a piece of paper on the freeway in California, you pay a $1,000 fine. So the policy in California is legalization of marijuana. The policy in many states is the same. Is it good? Is it bad? I don't know. And I really don't care. But we need to have a coherent policy. We can't have drugs coming into the U.S. being the worst thing in the world, and the Mexican government should put all its resources and have people killed and have police officers killed and have mayors threatened and things like that. While once the drugs get into the U.S., well, you know, just a kid, just a sports figure and using drugs, you know, we're not going to prosecute. Let's make it coherent. If we are going to fight drugs, both countries, let's have the same rules. If the U.S. is going to legalize the use of drugs, well, let's do it, and we'll, you know, have Mexican growers grow marijuana. So, but let's do the same. We can't have a different set of rules for Mexico and a different set of rules for the U.S. We can't have the U.S. supplying drug cartels with high volume artillery while they won't even sell those same guns to the Mexican army. And we need to figure out what to do with all those criminals that are being in the U.S. jails and are being released and are now being created as the salespersons for those drugs, at least in 252 cities, so that we can jointly solve that problem. And most of all, and I managed to do it while I was mayor, don't export all of your criminals to one city. They fly them out. I told them, why don't you send them to Mexico City? We need to fly them to Mexico City. I said, well, you fly them from Atlanta, that's where they get most of them, concentrate them, and then fly them to El Paso. And the flight from Atlanta to El Paso is a longer flight than Atlanta to Mexico City. So I said, fly them to Mexico City. Oh, no, it's an international flight where we don't have the funding for that. So they sent them to El Paso and walk them across the bridge into Juarez. So it's something that we need to do. And to tell you the truth, I admire, I'm a pre-mayor. PRI is the party that's been in power in Mexico, was in power in Mexico for 75 years. The PAN is just been in power 12 years. President Calderon is from the PAN, I am from the PRI, but I can say I admire President Calderon. I think he's doing a great job. I think he should have, what he did, we needed to do. And it's been extremely painful. But if we didn't do it when he did it, it would have been doubly painful 6 years later. So we have to do it, and I am very grateful that the U.S. policy towards Mexico and towards this problem has changed dramatically. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, her first trip was to Mexico City, and the first thing she said in Mexico City was, the problem in Mexico is a joint problem. And the solution to the problem in Mexico is a joint solution. It's a problem of the U.S., it's a problem of Mexico, and recognizing that, I think, is the first step to finding a solution. And of course, the interest of all of you in understanding this problem, communicating this problem to the decision makers is so important. So I'm very glad and grateful that I was invited today to speak before you. Thank you. questions.
Thank you very much, Jose, for that very insightful, informative presentation, and I hope that you do. And now we will begin our question and answer. If you have a question, please do raise your hand and wait for Yana to come over with the microphone.
Thank you very much for a most informative discussion speech. How do you feel about legalization of drugs?
I think you have to see it in two different ways. Economically, it makes tremendous sense. You get taxes out of it. You don't invest so much money in fighting drug sales, and you're never going to stop the drug sales. It's never going to go away. And we have the experience of alcohol use in the 20s. So we know it's not going away. Economically, it makes tremendous sense. And I think 30 or 40 economists have, or 100 economists have signed, so many Nobel Peace Prize economists have signed saying we should legalize drugs. But that's only part of the equation. The other part of the equation is the social effect of drugs. And it is a matter of discussion. And I have not decided whether it's good or not, other than economically. I think you really need to think about it. And one of the main factors that you need to think about is how prevalent is drug use. If it is very prevalent, then it makes sense because you can treat it, control it, like we did with tobacco. It's tobacco has, the consumption of tobacco has gone down tremendously. So it makes sense if you have that. For Mexico, we just had the drug use survey. And drug use in Mexico is about 10% of what it is in the United States. So for Mexico, it doesn't make sense. Because the drug consumption in Mexico is so small that if we legalize, it will grow exponentially. For the U.S., it depends on the cities, and I think a survey, and the National Institutes of Health do surveys. I think that is a major consideration. But one thing that we do need to consider is that we cannot legalize just in one country, just in one state. We need to do it jointly. We need to talk about this. And the State Department holds every year 2 conferences, 2 meetings of Mexican and U.S. policymakers to determine what to do with drugs. It is a great meeting. I was invited to be in 2010 there and speak about this. And they are discussing it policy-wise. But I think it is still a very difficult decision. I don't have an opinion either way.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on 2 things. One is on the excellent presentation, and secondly, being able to survive 3 years as the mayor and still working.
Thank you.
Congratulations. I found your last comment quite interesting. I have 2 questions. One is, are you aware that there's been a recent major United Nations review of the approach to controlling drugs worldwide? And while I haven't read it, I've read reviews of it, I understand they're very critical of the war on drugs. And that it's gone on for some time, maybe perhaps 30 years, and things haven't changed. And from a variety of criteria, it doesn't seem to be very successful in terms of users, in terms of money going into crime, in terms of the cost of drugs. I appreciate your comment on that, and whether you've seen that study, and how you feel about its recommendations. The second question I have is, my understanding is that the violence and the drug problems related to drug trafficking to the United States and Mexico is fairly recent. And when the cocaine from the Andean countries used to come up through the Caribbean, and then the US DEA stopped that, as an alternative route, they started bringing up the drugs through Central America and Mexico, which was related to the great increase in the problems in Mexico. I wonder why you hadn't mentioned that. Is that really the case, or do you have a different understanding?
Yes, that's definitely the case. I'll go back to the UN comment. If you take a look at it, if you try what the UN says, if you legalize, you can legalize some drugs, but not all drugs. So, like, you have varying degrees, and I would say drugs, the first drug is coffee, second drug is tobacco, third drug is alcohol, fourth drug is marijuana, fifth drug, you go on. And they all alter the senses in some way. And so we have decided that coffee, tobacco, and alcohol are legal. They are sense-altering drugs. So we can go up in the scale. We can go up to marijuana, we can go up to the next steps and set prices and set qualities and set other things. And that's where the discussion is. And states like California have decided, yes, we'll go with marijuana. Is it good? It has some good effects. And my particular worry is methamphetamines. Because methamphetamine is addictive at the first use. It's much more addictive than cocaine. And it is extremely difficult to leave, like heroin is. Ciudad Juarez is one of the cities with the largest heroin use in Mexico. It's the city with the largest heroin use in Mexico. And I have seen the person side. One day I was walking on the street at night, and this young lady came up, and she had her heroin shot. And I was walking with police officers, and she looked at us, and she said, you know, boom, right in front of us. She needed that, and heroin is so addictive that it is extremely hard to take it away from her. It's the same thing with methamphetamines. And because the sellers of methamphetamines can produce them in their homes locally, those are the drugs they're taking to our kids in schools. And those are the drugs, and they have, I don't know if you've seen them, but they have, when I first came into office, I did a tremendous push so that kids wouldn't use them in Juarez. We don't have a high consumption of meth in Juarez. They had Pokemon faces on the methamphetamine drugs. They were yellow and Pokemon. You know, those are not designed for high school students. Those are designed for younger kids. So that's what the UN is saying, and it is part of the debate, and it needs to be considered. And if we go ahead and legalize drugs, we're opening it up for persons who would never use it. And that is a tremendous effect also. So, you know, if you've never had a drink, it becomes legal. Will you have a drink? Yeah, I'll try it. And what would happen with harder drugs? It is such a difficult debate. And I think we don't need to consider just the economics of it. I think that's my point for that we need to do it. And yes, you're right. The flow of drugs was initially 80% of cocaine consumed in the United States came through the Caribbean. In the 80s, the DEA stopped it, and the U.S. Coast Guard, and it came to the point where 90% of cocaine flowed through Mexico. But now it's only 60%.
Great presentation, and I thank you. Before the meeting started, we were talking about maquiladoras. What can they do to protect themselves? First question. From any kind of attack by the cartels. Second, they really haven't been targeted by the cartels, so the second part of the question is why? And then the third part of the question is what impact has it had on maquiladoras relocating not only in Juarez, but into Mexico in general?
It's a good question. You know, the drug cartels are not dumb. They will not attack U.S. citizens in Mexico. We had an incident where 3 U.S. consulate workers were killed in Juarez, or consulate-related workers were killed in Juarez. When that happened, of course, all our antennas went up, especially because a week earlier, the Washington Post had published an article saying that DEA agents were actively investigating the drug cartels in Juarez. They used an unnamed former government official as their source and said that. I immediately called the Consul General of the United States in Juarez and said, you know, we need to do something to protect the 300 U.S. citizens that are working in Juarez giving out visas. Because if the drug cartels believe this, they're going to think those 300 people are DEA agents. A week later, a week after the Washington Post article, there was a party, a kid party, a birthday party. 2 persons left at the same time in 2 similar cars. They left the different ways, and the gentleman driving one of the cars, a white Honda SUV, was killed. And the husband and wife driving a white Toyota SUV was killed, driving the other way. They actually chased after them. He noticed that he drove really fast, tried to get to the bridge into the U.S., but was caught and killed. Right after that was a Saturday. On Monday, Mexican president went to Juarez, and the U.S. ambassador was waiting for him in Juarez, and I was privy to the meeting they had, and I was expecting that, you know, they will be alarmed and say, oh, they're attacking our consulate personnel. But the U.S. ambassador had intelligence information that told them that the attack was directed at the gentleman driving that second car, who was a custodian at the jail in El Paso. And they had done something to an Azteca in the jail in El Paso, and the Azteca then requested the Aztecas in Juarez to kill this custodian, and his wife was a bystander in this whole operation. So there was nothing directed at the U.S. consulate, and this was a particular incident. The drug cartels do not direct their actions at U.S. citizens. There hasn't been any U.S. citizen killed as a target, other than guys who were selling guns and things like that. So there's no, that is not a question. They don't attack U.S. companies because they know that that's what we live for. That's our business. That's our livelihood. And so it hasn't been because of specific efforts by the government. It hasn't been because specific efforts by the U.S. companies. It is just a matter of what is going on. And what is going on is a war between the cartels. They attack themselves, they attack the gangs, but they are not attacking foreign companies and foreign maquiladoras and foreign citizens and tourist places. So, it's not something where they're like civil war where in Colombia, where they were putting bombs in populated places so that people will be killed. Here, they are attacking themselves, and that has been very fortunate to us. I was able to bring in a company to Juarez that created initially 20,000 jobs, will create 80,000 jobs, and I did it while this 6,000 people were being killed in the city, and it's all because they're not attacking themselves.
Can you comment on the Fast and Furious program and how it's affected Mexico?
That class I'm teaching in Overland as part of the curriculum, it says, Fast and the Furious, what were they thinking? It is amazing that they could do something like that. But it is, you police officers do control drug buys. They do control drug transportation. They were very successful yesterday in getting 2 Iranians that wanted to kill the Saudi ambassador. They know about this. They let them go. They see what they're doing. They see where the money's coming from. They see who their friends are, who their contacts are. You do that under a controlled setting. Here, they forced gun sellers to sell to known operators of the cartels to see where the guns end up. But the guns don't have like a chip that you can see from a satellite where it's moving to or anything. All you know is that this gun ended up killing somebody in Mexico, and here's the casing of the gun. And that was the operation. It is unbelievable. I see no objective to it, no planning on it, and the families of killed police officers in Mexico don't end up suing the agents. It is just something that, at least administrative should go out, if not criminal sanctions to the people who organize that. It is, it's incredible that somebody would even think about that.
Hi. Our Model United Nations team appreciates the opportunity to listen to you speak. And my question is, like in the United States, with legalization, with states trying to legalize it, what negotiations could Mexico do with the cartels, or what are your thoughts on negotiations with legalizing marijuana, or with the levels you were talking to up to marijuana, and what the cartels would react, or how they would react to that, to negotiations for legalizing?
Yeah, it's, I think you don't negotiate with the cartels. You really need to be in a position where the government sets certain guidelines and says, okay, what was happening in Mexico? There's a flow of drugs into the U.S. The U.S. knows where they're coming from, they know where they're going to, they know who's selling it, but getting enough money and enough police force to stop the sale of drugs in the whole country is out of the question for the U.S. So they do some vice raids and things like that, but even though they know who's selling it, they don't go full force to try to stop it. Well, the Mexican government didn't go full force to try to stop the flow into the U.S. And when the government is sufficiently strong, he can say, well, those who are selling drugs or those cartels that are operating, if they operate outside the coast of Mexico, well, we're not going to send airplanes to the west of the Pacific to try and find them and find submergible apparatus or something like that. But that's a policy decision. That's not a negotiation with the cartels. What would happen if marijuana was legalized? I think we'll see in any case, there's so much homegrown marijuana in the United States. A lot of the marijuana is being grown in homes with special lighting and things like that. It's a lot cheaper to grow it in home than it is to import it from Mexico because of all the controls. So we're going to see a lot more homegrown marijuana. So that is going to reduce the sales and the flow of marijuana and the growth of marijuana in Mexico. I think we're going to see, unfortunately, it's not something that I like, but we're going to see a lot more growth in methamphetamine sales in the United States, and that will create a lot less demand for cocaine in the United States, and thus the flow of cocaine will stop or go down through Mexico, and that will be positive for Mexico. It will be extremely negative on the effects of children, especially in the United States, because of the effects of meth. But that's what the World Drug Report says and what we see happening. And those are without legalization. That's just economics.
You're a very brave man, and I commend you for the service that you've done. I'm wondering if you can address the issue of corruption in the Mexican government and the law enforcement institutions and the role that narco-traffickers have in infiltrating those institutions and how it is as a civic executive in dealing with that.
Yeah, that's a biggie. The drug dealers call themselves La Maña and in Mexico. And they have a saying that says, Maña sin policía no es maña. And the translation is even better. Organized crime without the help of the police is not well organized. And they buy the police. And they buy the police in the U.S. and they buy the police in Mexico. The great difference is that, in the U.S., they probably buy 1 or 2% of the police, and the rest of the police is so big, and the department is so well structured that you can find out who the bad guy is and put him in jail. In Mexico, they buy sufficient people and threaten sufficient people that you can find out who's doing it. In Juarez, when I took office, I had 1,600 police officers. I fired the top managers of the police department. The chief of police, the prior chief of police, before I took office, was caught 2 months later driving a ton of marijuana in his car into El Paso, Texas. The chief of police. You can imagine what type of corruption there was. First thing we did was we put we got a court order, or the federal government got a court order to listen in to several police officers that we suspected. One of the conversations in his cell phone, one of the mid-level managers of the police gets a phone call from the drug dealer, says, this guy is in his home, this is the address, I want you to pick him up, take him to me, I'll be at the mall in a white Suburban at 12 o'clock this afternoon. Using that same cell phone, he calls a police squad car and gives him the instruction. The police squad car with 2 uniformed police officers go to the home of this person, go into the home, take the person from his home in the squad car, and take him to the mall and deliver him to the drug dealer waiting in the white Suburban. Federal police officers were listening in, and they immediately went after the white Suburban. They couldn't catch up. The body of the person was found 2 hours later. The mid-level manager of the police and the 2 police officers were arrested. In their interrogations, they confessed to killing 12 other people the same way. And the police officers, after the drug dealers killed them, the police officers buried them so that they wouldn't find them. And they went to the place where they were buried, and the police insignia of one of the police officers was there. He dropped it when he was burying some of the people that told those stories. That was the police I inherited. By the end of the first year of government, I fired half of the police force. Half. It cost the lives of so many people within the police force to do that. The administrative assistant at the police, 42-year-old single mom, she was the one who decided who took the competence polygraph exams that we did in order to determine who was crooked and who was not. She was killed. 2 chiefs of police were killed. A lot of people, it cost the life of a lot of people, so it's something that you need to do. And the worst thing is, it cost the city $80 million to operate the police. It only cost the drug cartels $500,000 to buy sufficient people within the organization to actually have the organization working for the cartel. Because, a few of them are working for the cartel, but the rest of them are so scared that they say, we're not going to do it. So, thank you very much.
Jose, thank you very much for sharing this evening with us, increasing our understanding of and engaging us in a very good dialogue about this very serious issue that impacts both other countries. So again, we appreciate your being here with us this evening. As a token of our appreciation, we'd like to present you with the memory of Cleveland, what we'll call Cleveland then and now. So